Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. The first night it began, rain hammered the roof of our two-story house in Southfield, Michigan, the old gutters rattling in the wind. I was curled up on the living room couch, a blanket up to my chin, the soft hum of a sitcom rerun filling the space between me and the dark. My husband's phone buzzed on the coffee table. I barely noticed until the glow cut through the shadows. A contact name lit the screen, Charles Work, followed by a single red heart emoji. My frown was immediate. Wesley was not close with any Charles at his accounting job, certainly not close enough for hearts. Not even in the teasing way he once texted his mother purple hearts after a doctor's appointment to make her smile. I reached for the phone on instinct. Before I could touch it, Wesley came in from the kitchen, wiped his hands on a dish towel, and snatched it up with the speed of a man who had set down something burning. He slid his eyes over me and said, "Work message. Somebody texting late again." I wanted to let it go and chalk it up to the endless noise of modern life, but my gut did not. His hands trembled just enough to register. The contact photo for Charles was blank, just the gray default icon, like it had been created quickly without care. It is the little things that betray you always. A few days later, I found a tube of lipstick rolling on the passenger side floor of Wesley's Dodge Charger. It was MAC Ruby Woo, that unmistakable bright red. It was not mine. I picked it up and twisted the tube, checking for any hint of a familiar smell, but there was nothing except the smooth plastic, cold as a lie. Wesley's voice floated from the open garage door. He said, "Babe, are you coming?" I slipped the lipstick into my pocket. I held it up. I asked, "Whose is this?" He glanced at it and shrugged. He said, "Probably your cousin's. You know how messy those girls are." I knew better. My cousins were grown women with steady tastes, and none of them wore this shade. Besides, I had deep cleaned that car after our last road trip to Chicago. Not a crumb, not a hairpin, not a single mint wrapper had escaped me. Before I could press, Wesley had already moved on, fiddling with his golf clubs and changing the subject. He said, "Do you want me to pick up wings for dinner?" The days blurred, cold March air mixing with a suspicion that would not leave my chest. Wesley's work schedule began to stretch. He said, "It is audit season. Backlog." Some nights he did not bring home his laptop, which made no sense during an audit. Other times he came in late smelling like soap I did not recognize, a fragrance with a citrus top note and something powdery that did not belong to our house. My sister, Alicia, started acting strangely too. She had always been the life of Sunday dinners, talking with her hands, laughing too loud, teasing me about everything from my tight curls to my stubbornness. Now, when we met at Good Cakes Bakery for coffee, Alicia kept her eyes glued to the cup, stirring and barely tasting it. She kept checking her phone, fingers trembling slightly, as if she were waiting for a bomb to drop. I asked, "Are you all right, Alicia?" I searched her face for the girl I grew up with. She nodded too fast and said, "Work stress. Too many shifts." Alicia had been a nurse at Henry Ford Hospital for 8 years. There was no shift pattern she could not handle, no crisis that wiped color from her face. Now she looked brittle, pale, and every time I asked another question, she got quieter, as if the words themselves were dangerous. I stopped sleeping through the night. My nerves felt like live wires. One Thursday, after Wesley said he had a late call and disappeared downstairs, I lay in bed listening to the house. My heart beat so hard I heard it in my ears. I waited, breathing slow, letting my body sink heavy into the mattress the way a diver settles before a drop. Around 1:30 in the morning, I heard the floorboards creak. Wesley moved soft and careful, like someone tiptoeing past a wild animal. I slid out of bed, bare feet on old pine boards, and followed his shadow down the stairs. He was in the kitchen, his back to me, talking in a low whisper. I strained to hear. He said, "She does not suspect anything." A second voice, softer, Alicia's voice, murmured, "Are you sure? She seems off." My pulse skipped. I stayed in the dark, peering around the corner at a slant that kept me hidden, but gave me the angle I needed. Wesley moved to the garage and opened the side door. Under the flickering porch light, Alicia stood with her arms crossed, shivering in her scrubs. He handed her a thick white envelope. She tucked it into her bag, glancing around like she expected sirens. Wesley said, voice cold as Michigan snow, "She will never know." Alicia nodded, her jaw tight. They parted without another word. I slipped back upstairs on legs that remembered the path, even as my mind spun. In bed, I kept my eyes closed and pretended to sleep as Wesley crept in beside me. By dawn, I knew I had to see what was in that envelope. I waited until Wesley left for work, his cologne trailing behind him like a cloud of memory that made me want to open a window. In the garage, my hands shook as I went through the obvious places. The tool chest, the recycling, the bin for old mail. At first, nothing. Then, near the bottom of the trash, I found the envelope, torn open and folded into itself. Inside was a stack of documents, heavy with legalese. On top sat a copy of my birth certificate. Beneath it, a copy of my driver's license, except the picture was old, my name correct, but the signature was wrong, thick and shaky as if someone had mimicked me with their non-dominant hand. There were other forms stamped and signed, including one with a bold title at the top, Incompetency Petition. I stared, numb. The words ran together, unable to manage finances. Displays signs of paranoia. Exhibits forgetfulness and confusion. The signature at the bottom was supposed to be mine. I had never written it. Wesley's notary stamp gleamed in the margin like a smirk. My knees gave out. I sat down hard on the cold garage floor, the envelope and its contents fanning around me like a paper storm. The realization came slow, and then all at once, a flood that emptied me. They were trying to make me disappear, not just in my own house, but in the eyes of the court. That afternoon, Alicia came by unannounced. She looked tired, hair pulled tight, no makeup, the kind of plainness a person uses to pass unnoticed. She brought me peach cobbler from our mother's recipe and smiled too wide. I tried to act normal. I said, "You seem stressed, Alicia. Is something going on?" She flinched and said, "No, just these new rules at the hospital." I sipped my coffee and watched her pick at her nails, the way she used to do when we were children and our father asked who had broken the vase. I said, "You would tell me if something was wrong, right?" She looked up, and for a blink I saw tears in her eyes. Then she blinked them away and said, "I would. I promise." I did not believe her, not anymore. When she left, I locked the door behind her and leaned my forehead against the glass, willing myself to breathe. I began checking everything. In the attic, between boxes of old photo albums and our father's Army discharge papers, I found the folder marked family property. Washtenaw County. The land outside an arbor, 20 acres of thick woods and a creek, left to me in our father's will. I read his shaky handwriting aloud to steady myself. For my daughter Denise. Trust her with this land. Alicia had wanted that land for as long as I could remember. She hated that our father left it to me and not to both of us. She did not fight about it, or so I thought. Now I wondered what else she had done in the quiet. Days bled together. My world twisted on a slow axis I could not control. My keys would vanish from the bowl by the door and turn up in the laundry basket. My favorite hoodie appeared in the garage, half buried under bags of rock salt. I asked Wesley if he had seen my things. He shrugged and said, "Maybe you left it somewhere." I started writing everything down, dates, times, details, colors, smells. I recorded my days like a lab tech collecting evidence at the edge of a field no one believed in but me. Then my phone began to act strangely. Text messages to my best friend, Keisha, showed as sent, but she swore she never received them. Appointments disappeared from my calendar. My email password changed overnight. One day, my therapist called and said, "Denise, I received your cancellation notice, and I wanted to check in." I felt a familiar chill and said, "I did not cancel." She said, "Someone logged in from your home internet address. Do you want me to freeze your account?" I said, "Yes, please." That night, Wesley watched me over his book, face smooth, voice soft. He said, "Are you sure you are all right, baby? You seem scattered." I bit my lip and said, "I am just tired." He nodded, but I recognized calculation pooling in his eyes. I started hiding evidence. I tucked notes into the inside flap of an old magazine, recorded voice memos into a cloud account under a false folder name, and bought a small camera disguised as a phone charger. I plugged it into the kitchen outlet and told myself that the truth does not need sleep. Every night after Wesley thought I had drifted off, he made phone calls. Quiet. Urgent. One night I heard him whisper near the back window, pacing. He said, "Just a few more weeks. Alicia will handle the papers. She will not last much longer." In the morning, he hummed "Ain't No Mountain High Enough" and poured coffee like a man who slept without dreams. I stared at his hands and memorized the shape of his knuckles. I drove to the county clerk's office with my nerves shot and asked the young clerk at the window, I would like to see any recent filings for 2124 Old Ridge Road. My voice shook despite my effort to keep it even. She clicked through records, printed a stack, and slid them across the counter. 3 months earlier, Alicia had filed a motion contesting our father's will. 2 weeks later, there was a signed withdrawal letter. At the bottom, my name forged. Beside it, Wesley's notary stamp and name as witness. I wanted to scream. Instead, I paid for copies, stuffed them into my purse, and drove home in silence, the radio off, my heart hammering like a fist on a locked door. Now I had proof, fake signatures, false notary stamps, whispered late-night plans. But I could not reveal that I knew. I made a plan inside the quiet. I began acting exactly the way they wanted me to act. I left milk out on the counter until it soured. I mismatched my shoes. I forgot earrings I never forget. Wesley and Alicia looked at me with pity and concern and something else, a thin sheen of triumph they tried to disguise. They said, "We just want to help," in voices syrupy with practiced worry. I started a diary filled with nonsense, lists of colors, the same word written over and over in neat rows. I left it half hidden under my pillow. One afternoon, I saw the crease in its pages that had not been there before. Wesley had read it. He closed the book and smiled at me like I was a wounded animal he had a leash for. Alicia began stopping by more often, always with soup, always with new excuses to stay. She brought me fuzzy socks, herbal tea, and gospel compact discs. I thanked her and repeated myself and asked the same question twice. She started to keep a polite distance, as if the confusion she was constructing might rub off on her scrubs. Wesley arranged a house visit from a psychologist, a large man in a cheap gray suit who smelled faintly of mothballs. He asked me to recite dates and names of presidents, to count backward by sevens, to draw a clock. He watched the way I picked at my sweater sleeve and scribbled notes with a face that said my fate was already written. I laughed at odd times, stared out the window, and answered every question twice, never the same way. What Wesley did not know was that I had already called Mr. Richmond, our father's old friend, who now practiced law in Detroit. I met Mr. Richmond in his office, a brick building with a window that framed the river like a photograph. He listened without interrupting, and he did not look at me like a patient or a child. He said, "Bring me everything." I did. I handed over fake documents, voice recordings, the camera footage, and the county filings. He called a handwriting expert, a black woman named Dr. Harris from Wayne State. She studied the signatures and notary stamps and wrote a report that cut like a scalpel. She said, "Absolutely forged." Mr. Richmond's expression did not change. He said, "We will be ready." I spent my nights making copies and sliding flash drives into the toes of old boots. I buried manila folders under the dogwood in the backyard and mailed one package to Keisha without a return address. Wesley and Alicia thought they were breaking me. I let them think it, because their arrogance had become a tool I could use. Then, one morning, Wesley made me breakfast with a care that was almost believable. He was patient and too sweet. He said, "You have a doctor's appointment at noon. I will take you." He drove. Alicia rode in the back seat with her hand resting on my shoulder, like she was steadying a child. When we pulled into the parking lot, the sign did not say Family Health. It said Midtown Behavioral Health Facility. Wesley parked and said, "It is just a check-in." I looked at Alicia. She stared at her hands. A nurse met us at the door with a clipboard ready the way a stage manager readies a prop. Wesley produced a stack of documents, the incompetency petition on top, the forged withdrawal letter behind it, his notary stamp shining in the corner. He smiled at me with his teeth, calm and steady, and said, "This is for your own good, Denise. You will thank us one day." The nurse stepped forward. Before anyone could move, a navy sedan slid to the curb. Mr. Richmond climbed out, briefcase in hand, 2 Detroit police officers behind him. He held up a thick file and said, voice carrying like a bell, "I think you all should see this first." Wesley's mouth fell open. Alicia took a half step back and fought for breath. The officers began to read, flipping through evidence. Printed photographs from the hidden camera, copies of forged forms, the report on notary fraud. Wesley tried to bluster, to explain, to turn charm into law, but the officers cut him off. They cuffed him on the sidewalk and read him his rights. Alicia sobbed. "I did not mean." But intention could not refute signatures and footage and a timeline that fit too neatly. The nurse stood on the threshold, her clipboard pressed to her chest, eyes wide with a confusion that had not been rehearsed. After the trial, After reporters and questions and neighbors who stared at the grocery store, our house grew quiet again. Wesley was convicted of fraud, forgery, and notary misconduct and sentenced to 5 years. Alicia lost her nursing license for her role in the scheme and accepted a plea that kept her out of prison but barred her from the work she had loved. I kept the land. I kept my name. The Detroit newspaper ran a story. Some people whispered. Others nodded with a solemn respect I did not know what to do with. The spring air smelled like clean laundry and fresh soil. I opened windows and let it in. I turned the front rooms of our home into a space for Black women in crisis, sisters with stories too often ignored or disbelieved. We held Tuesday circles where everyone was allowed to talk without interruption. We taught one another how to keep records, how to copy documents, how to archive text messages without alerting the person who wanted to erase the trail. A woman named Patrice brought fresh lilies and said, "The smell makes me feel like I have a new house." A teenager named Maya came with her aunt and whispered. I did not know anyone would believe me. I said, "I do." Late one night, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name in careful block letters that pressed too hard. Inside was a postcard of the Detroit River at sunset, the Ambassador Bridge in silhouette. On the back, 5 words. Still pretending to sleep. A. No name. No apology. I knew. I took the postcard to the backyard, tossed it into the fire pit, and watched it burn, sparks spinning up into the Michigan night like a swarm of bright insects. When the last corner blackened and curled, I turned, went inside, and closed the door. Sometimes I stand in the garage where I first opened that envelope and say nothing. The concrete remembers. The air remembers. I do not pray for different outcomes. I thank the stubborn part of me that refused to be erased. When the house is empty and the Tuesday circle chairs are stacked, I walk into the kitchen and trace the outlet where the hidden camera once sat. It looks like any other outlet now, harmless and blank. I know better. The truth lives in ordinary places. One Saturday in June, Keisha came by with a box of glazed donuts and said, "We are not talking about any of that today. We are talking about you." We sat at the table and split a donut, the glaze flaking like snow. She said, "When did you know you were free?" I said, "The moment the handcuffs closed around his wrists, I realized I had been holding my breath for months." She nodded and said, "You breathe different now." I said, "I do. Mr. Richmond called to check on me every few weeks. Once he said, 'How is the land?' I said, 'It is exactly what he thought it would be. Quiet. Stubborn. It keeps its own time.' He said, 'Your father knew where strength belonged.' A month later, I drove out to the property alone and walked the line of trees, their leaves bright with summer. The creek made its small music. I kneeled and pressed my hand to the dirt and said, 'I am here.' No one answered, which was the answer I needed. When word came that Alicia was working at a community pantry, filling boxes and rolling carts to trunks, I drove by and parked down the block. I watched her carry bags to a trunk and waved to a woman holding a baby. Her hair was pulled back, and she moved with a careful purpose I recognized. I did not get out. I did not wave. I did not need her to see me to know the piece of this that belonged to her had landed where it should. On an evening when thunderheads gathered over the neighborhood, a woman from the Tuesday circle stayed behind to help me stack chairs. She said, "Do you ever regret not confronting him sooner?" I thought about the lipstick and the false contact, the heart emoji sent by Charles Work, and said, "I regret the time I spent doubting my own eyes. But the timing was what it needed to be. The evidence had to be complete." She said, "You turned the trap around." I said, "I made them step into their own plan." I keep a copy of Dr. Harris's report in a file drawer labeled Keep. The paper smells faintly of toner and a kind of bitter reassurance. On hard days, I read the first line again. In my professional opinion, the signatures attributed to the subject are not authentic. Facts are a bomb. So are the voices of women in the Tuesday circle who say, "I thought I was alone," and leave with a folder of steps and a phone list thick with names who will answer at 3 in the morning. The night before Wesley went to prison, his attorney left a message on my phone that said, "He wants to apologize." I deleted it, not because I could not listen, but because forgiveness does not always require proximity. There are apologies that exist as postcards tossed into fires, as rooms painted fresh, as chairs stacked after a good meeting. There are apologies that look like quiet. I chose the quiet I had earned. On my father's birthday, I drove to Belle Isle and parked near the water. The wind came off the river cold and certain. I thought about the sentence in his will. Trust her with this land. Trust is weight. It sits on the palm like a stone you can pocket or throw. I have pocketed it, and it has made me steady. On the bridge home, the lights along the curve looked like a necklace clasped at the back of a city that has survived more endings than most. I rolled down the window and let the air slap my face awake. A year after the trial, a new neighbor moved in across the street, a woman with a little boy who loved to race his scooter in circles. She asked about the Tuesday circle, and I told her we meet each week. She said, "Do you have space for one more?" I said, "We always do." On her first night, she said, "I thought I was losing my mind." I said, "You are not. You are here." She cried and laughed at the same time, the way bodies do when they finally recognize a room where they are not on trial. The rain returns every spring and hammers the roof like a memory trying to be heard. When it does, I pull a blanket to my chin and let the sound come through the vents and the thin glass, and I do not flinch. I know which creaks belong to the house and which footsteps belong to fear. This is the life I chose. Windows open, evidence kept, chairs ready, doors that close and stay closed. I slide the living room lamp a little to the left, the way I like it, and settle into the couch as if it were a dock on a lake that belongs to me. The hum of the television fills the space between me and the dark, and the quiet wraps around me like new skin. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.